Hello, everyone. Welcome to this amazing webinar. I'm Tony Joy from Sound Particles. Very excited to have everyone over today. Joining me today, well, how do I start the introduction with this amazing human being? So we all have met amazing human beings, then we have also met some amazing engineers. Put that both together, we get Alan Meyerson. Alan,
I thought
welcome.
you were talking about George.
Ah, You, my friend. So I met Alan 15 years this month. I just found out this morning. And I have the pleasure of knowing him as a friend, as a mentor, and as everyone knows, an amazing engineer. You all know his credits. I'm not going to list them. It will take me 2 days. So Alan, thank you so much for joining us. And I also want to wish you a happy birthday in advance. His birthday is coming up in 2 days. Happy birthday, Alan.
Yes, it is. It's the 27th anniversary of my 40th birthday.
Aha. Thanks, Alan. And also joining me is George from Apogee. So, George, thank you for joining us.
So excited to be
Today,
here.
yeah, you're awesome. I just want to give a quick shout out to Apogee, actually. For those of you who might know, Apogee is a very leading pro audio company, which also happens to be a women-owned company. So Betty Bennett has been leading the industry and mentoring so many people and setting a great higher bar for everyone, men and women, while helping, minorities and women start businesses. So I just want to give a shout out to Apogee. Same with Alan. Alan has helped so many people like myself, Ava, Sylvia Massey. Like so many engineers have come from Alan's mentorship. And this is something Alan keeps doing. And this is why I am so genuinely excited to do this webinar, because this is not slideshows. This is not tips and tricks. This is Alan, George, and me having a conversation about music and how Alan shapes soundtracks with his magic. And this is going to be a casual conversation where all of you get to join us today. So thank you again for joining us. So with that, I already mentioned about Apogee. I work for Sound Particles. We are a Portuguese company. We are a deep tech company with a deep focus on everything audio and music. We make plugins and software that people like Alan use. We take feedback from Alan and other engineers and try to make things better. Now, with all those intros aside, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please post them in chat. My colleague Eduardo is keeping an eye on it. Again, keep in mind, we have hundreds of your attendees. We are very humbled and honored. We will try our best to tackle each question, but keep in mind, there's so much little time and so many questions. With that, the goal today is, Alan, as you can see, has a Pro Tools session from Dune to soundtrack. We will be looking at the Love theme. Alan's going to play back the session, and then we will kind of walk through and ask Alan questions and learn from his infinite wisdom. Alan.
And so when we say a playthrough, we're going to do a partial playthrough, because the thing about Dune that's interesting is that all of the pieces in it are sort of long pieces, 6, 7, 10 minutes long. And then, in preparing for the seminar, trying to pick which ones to be able to play back. And it was interesting. So I ended up sort of going with the kind of love theme, because people really seem to resonate with it. And I did, on this particular cue, use a bunch of energy panners and a bunch of the Clear Mountains domain. So it would give me an opportunity to show you different ways to use it. So I'm going to just hit play. And can I talk while I play?
Absolutely, please.
So even from the very top. Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. Happens when you have, what, 600 tracks?
Well, when I have 600 tracks and I'm running it now, it's not wanting to grab it back. Or maybe I did something wrong here in terms of, oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone, you got to understand, I'm sort of like struggling a way to, that's my dog, Luigi. He wants to say hi. Come here. Say hi. Say hi to everyone.
Hi, Luigi.
Hundreds of people out there. Hundreds, tens of people out there. There's at least 6 people out there. So sorry about that, but just because
Okay.
I'm running multiple programs at the same time. Now this will probably work now. I'm going to just jump in a little bit. Are you hearing me still?
Yes.
So this is a gentle panner just to take that, if you see this track here, the sand pad, and wrap it around the speakers a little bit. The energy panner,
Nice.
I've discovered there's three really great uses for it. One is on stuff like this. The secret to mixing for me is that you just want to keep movement. You want to keep the ear interested. The brain sort of goes numb after a while, and unless you have some movement and some kind of minor things to keep you interested, you sort of lose interest really quickly. So what I do is I embed a lot of movement onto tracks, and these two plugins that we're talking about are really amazing for that. I'll find you some more. So this is just a pad. But like even on the so I duplicated the Duduk track, and on the main track, I'm just softening it up. I'm tuning it, all that, controlling some mid range, and then I duplicate it and make it stereo so that I can add some of these gorgeous widening delays on it.
Okay. Alan, I think the volume is kind of taking over your voice when you speak. Oh. Did we... Alan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
No, you can pause maybe. I just want to make sure everyone can hear you clearly as well.
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yes.
Why don't we jump down to the... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Looks like people are saying
looks
it's
like people
loud
are saying loud and clear.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep rolling then. Sorry.
All
I
right.
apologize to have
I'm
interrupted.
going to jump down to the sort of, because if you've seen the movie, you know how the rest of that goes, but I'm going to go down to here. Sort of get into the bigger part. So this is a combination. I mean, here's the interesting thing about Dune is so much of the production was done by Hans and Steve and Dave and Andrew Kaczynski, and it came to me already sounding pretty amazing. And so my job was A, not to break it, and B, just to make it wider, bigger, more emotional, find where the low end wants to sit, get rid of the stuff that gets in the way, so on and so forth. So that's, this isn't the score where I'm like building a track from the ground up, which is good because on many of these cues, I have 1,000 tracks. So this one's 500 tracks. I'm just facing energy around. I just have a tiny bit of energy. So all I'm doing is I'm not letting the ear sort of get too comfortable listening to the sound. And I find that if you embed enough of these things in there, it always has a lot of energy. Therefore, the energy panner.
Right.
Let me see if, and then, so both the Clear Mountains, here's another one I think that has the energy panel. So as obviously this is a big tool for me. You're not hearing it in surround, but this is actually bouncing around in surround. Another great use I found for it, by the way, I might as well, while I've stopped, is what I'll do if I'm doing an Atmos mix is I'll set up a send to an energy panner and have the energy panner sitting on the ceiling and have it on a random pan. When the energy builds up, Alan's voice goes back. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
No, I know. I'm talking to them though. Um, and so then I can automate sends into the ceilings to just create movements, just to sort of keep the movement interesting. It's instead of using a reverb up there, I found that I didn't really want the decay. I just wanted to create that movement. So like if you would look at the soundtrack albums that I do, that you would see that. And so that's been amazing. And both of these plugins are great for this particular effect of creating, movement and distance and stuff like that. I think about that more than I think about EQ or even compression, or, if you look
You
at,
do.
yeah.
Actually, Alan, I just want to jump in and share with everyone. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I had the absolute pleasure and honor of assisting Alan for a while. And one thing, even before Atmos and spatial audio came in, there's two things I learned the most from Alan. One is when you're mixing for picture, never distract from the picture, right? Even when you have 5.1. But at the same time, Alan is the master of creating spaces and movements. In fact, with most automation tracks on Alan sessions, you will see automation line is almost straight line, but it has dots all over the place because it's what I started to call micro movements. In fact, I did a webinar on just micro movements when I was at
Right.
Avid. And this was based on Alan's things I learned from you, Alan. Right.
Right.
And when you speak, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I was about to say, so when you speak about energy panel moving things around, this is something you've been doing for decades, I would imagine.
Right, but it's just,
Yeah.
it certainly is easier now, and I need to do less automation. I find these presets that work really well for this stuff, and it's almost always the same thing where, the fact that now with most software you can blend, it really gives you
Yeah.
this incredible ability to just sort of, like, I always find the effect I want, and it might be like there's this create beats setting in Energy Panner. So on almost anything I have that's rhythmic, ba 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 ba. Um, uh, Gloria, not now. Okay, I'm on a webinar, so later. Okay, thank you. Yeah, go do upstairs. Okay, thank you. Little language barrier there.
Oh, nice.
I lost my oh, right. So there's two things I'll do with with things that are a pulse or a rhythm. I'll either have a panner on it that's just left and right, and I'll create whatever the rhythmic root of that sound is. So if it's a 16th note or an eighth note, and I'll get it so it's really just jamming, and then I just add in that much, which is a lot different because if you use a regular panner that you don't have blending on, you can control the width, but I'm not looking for
Right.
this. I'm looking for this, but just a little of it. So that's what's so great about that. And the same thing with the energy panner. So what that does for me in stereo, the energy panner does in surround or Atmos, actually, where I can time it with the threshold, and, to really sit on the rhythm. It's actually better to sit a little bit off the rhythm, and then just blend in a little bit, and it just creates a ton of movement, and but a ton of movement that you hardly hear. But if you take it out,
Right.
you realize instantly that you miss it.
Mhm.
That's the magic you do. You make things move without distracting from the screen, from the picture. So that's the magic right there.
Yeah.
George, did you want to jump in and ask any
Yeah,
questions?
I would actually love to ask Alan for some of the people that are working in conventional stereo that have worked with tools like wideners before, but haven't thought about the concept of how to integrate movement into their productions. How
Mhm.
do they know what to shoot for? What's the creative feeling that allows you to know when you're adding something that is enhancing versus becoming distracting?
Well, it's visceral. I mean, I don't really know the answer to that. I just do it until it sounds good to me. I sort of have a sensibility that, you can't. So here's the number one rule: is you can't make everything wide. The
Mhm.
same way you wouldn't want to have everything mono, you can't make everything wide, because if you make everything wide, then it's all just as, this is why sometimes for those of you that are orchestral people, I don't really prefer to have this orchestra set up with the violins one on the left, the violins one on the two on the right, the basses in the center, because to me it's a much more, when different sections play, you don't get that beautiful. That's what's great about orchestral music, is it's completely alive all the time. Um, so so what I do is I look for the things that I want to anchor my track with in the center, and that could be, a synth sound that has a nice density in the center that I like, and then something that's complementing that sound. I make I make maybe a little extra wide, and in stereo or even in immersive, I could pull it back off the screen a little bit. So now the thing that's created is not just here, but it's there like that. And I think about that, like I almost group together parts where I can figure out what would be a clever way to do that. And it's just really, it's just beard stroking. It's just sitting there going, what would sound good if I did that? There isn't a general rule. I know that I have certain things that I have general rules about, um, but most of the rules I have I break anyway, so it doesn't matter. I don't know if that answers your question or not. So like if you have two guitar, the pop, think about the pop thing where you have two guitars and you make one, then both mono and pan them left to right. Well, that's sort of the most integral way to do something like that. And that effect is just so amazing. But if you had a third guitar, where do you put it? Well, maybe
Yeah.
you just put it down the center, or maybe with that, you add a little width to it so that it fills the space right around it, even if it's rhythmic, or maybe you add delays to it and focus on the delays so that you get that great kind of thing. It's the great thing about music is, there isn't like a right and wrong, especially in the world of computer generated music, and especially with plugins like, both of your plugins, the Energy Panner Density, which is another sound particles plugin, and certainly Clear Mountain's Domain, so rooted in those basic things. Clear Mountain's Domain is great for guys of my age because I grew up with two harmonizers, two delays, and a reverb as one sound.
Mm.
So probably because I heard Bob do it, I don't know, many years ago.
Bob was awesome. But George, this was a great question. Alan, I want to actually ping pong on that very question because the question was about people who come from stereo and then trying to get into spatial, as everyone calls it now, 5.1, Atmos, all that. You, Alan, I remember one thing very clearly. You always paused and thought before you mic up. Like you were that engineer who never just put a mic immediately. You would walk the room. I observed you pause and think. And I could tell you were thinking in spatial, even when we were recording a piano in stereo, right?
Yeah.
So the point I'm coming to is one thing I mention a lot, and I think you can relate to this, Alan. No matter what format you might be mixing into, it could be Atmos, 5.1, 7.1, stereo, you always have to think in spatial. And
Well, it
all
could be
these
mono.
plugins, right?
It could be mono. There's a lot of spatial cues you can get in mono. Listen to any great jazz record from the 50s, and you
Right.
sort of get that. And there's ways that you can manipulate that. There's ways that you can use that to your advantage, or so spatial music it's really not exactly the right word for it, because even if you take a mono signal and pump it into a room, you're getting the mono signal, but you're also getting all of the reflections and reverberance, and you're in a sort of in a binaural world when all that happens. But
Right.
yeah, but I do think spatially. It's for me. That's whatever my stock and trade is. I might not get the best rock and roll drum sound, but you'll like my sound stage. I'm going to make it wider and more interesting and stuff like that. As does many of my mentors and idols that I have in
Right.
the engineering world. I learned everything from listening. I learned everything from listening to other records and stuff. I used to sit there for days in front of the stereo when I was young, listening to Steely Dan records with a piece of paper, writing down where all the instruments were, and like building a grid so that it wasn't just left, right, left, right, left, right, but I actually, and that kind of stuff sticks with you.
That's true. I just wanted to point out to everyone attending and watching that, don't let the format stop you. If you look at
Yeah.
Alan's session, you'll see stereo tracks, quad tracks, 7.1 tracks,
Right.
Atmos tracks.
There's a lot of great questions coming in too. balance of
Yeah.
mid-side is just as important as left-right. Absolutely true. And a lot of times I'll deal with mid-side balances. If I have a stereo track that feels a little center heavy, I'll use a plugin like the center plugin who I forgot who has it, some other plugin, or I'll just use, I'll set it up so that I can have with like a stereo with a mid-side compressor and I can control the left. That's what Fairchilds were invented for that, by the way, folks. They weren't invented for your drums. They were invented for your cutting head to be able to control how much center channel there is in a record so that they could make it deeper.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Ah, nice. Yeah,
yeah,
questions are pouring in, but Alan, I was wondering, could we play maybe towards the end? I heard some amazing melodic stuff towards the end. Can we listen to the track a bit more, perhaps?
of course. The solo. Wow, I don't actually know what we're listening to right now. I see
It
what's going on.
sounds great.
Thank you. But I'm just trying to get down to. Here it is. Because of the whole running zoom through this, I'm not able to to do switches and stuff like that like I normally do. But I was trying to compare to you the ref mix, which is basically going to sound the same, um, except it's not going to have nearly the depth that mine has. I'm trying to.
Right. I mean, personally, I think it sounds great.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I'm loving the micro movements. You're not flying things around left and right. Like
Right.
you said
Oh,
earlier, if you
they're
move
absolutely right.
everything,
Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Someone just found the answer online. Thank you. No, where's the? Oh, I see what's going on here. These are record tracks. I opened up the wrong folder. Sorry about that. Here. Ah, thank you, ZM Zach. Oh, hey, Zach, how are you? Zach's a buddy. So if I do this now, hopefully this will work. And so that's, make it louder. That's the width of the demo. And to someone who asked me about, does duplicating the track create phase problems? Not necessarily. As long as you think about the plugins you're using, the latencies sort of get reported appropriately. So on this particular plugin where I am duplicating the track, none of these plugins will create a problem with latencies that would create any phase issues. There's only a few plugins that will, but I avoid those when I do stuff like that. I'm a big tons and tons of Sans amp user when it comes to drums and stuff like that. And they're great for using for parallel compression because you can set them up on a send and a return and it works just great.
nice.
Okay, what else, folks? All these great questions. Oh my God, you guys, I can't keep up with you.
Ah,
Well, Alan, I got one more for you too, because one of the
All right.
things about domain that's interesting is that you can do different levels of delay. And I think you and Bob might share a method on this where the delays are commonly mismatched in terms of left versus right channel, and I also think that very commonly he's off grid. And I heard you talking about creating repetitions that are not exactly locked to grid.
Let me
Can you
try to
talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure, let me try to open one up where that's the case, because sometimes I don't do it that way. Let's see where this is. So here, basically, it's a quarter note and a dotted eighth note, okay, which I'm EQing. And then these guys are not offset because in this particular part of the pathway, I wanted them to be on the quarter and the eighth note. And then if I go down to here, you could see the offset of the pitch. This is an old trick from, probably invented by Bob, just a little plus minus on a micro pitch shift setting, either on a 910 or a 949 or something like that. I always like the dual 910s myself. And so that the delay is feeding into this. And then his chambers, which I love, but I'm a little bit more reluctant to use them at times. I just blend in a little bit, however much I need of each chamber, and I just create. You could play around and create a sound and that you like, and then you just use it on an insert, or in this case, it's a send. Oh no, it's a duplication. So this is this is a duplication. If I go here, this is the original sound with the choir. And then I add that to it. And then the two of them together sound pretty great. And you don't even notice it, but if I take it out, it just sounds a little flat, as opposed to that. Is that translating through the interwebs? You can hear the
You
difference.
can feel an energy difference for sure. Yeah.
So that's, I do a lot of that stuff. Yeah. What else? Feel free to post your questions. You next. Can we listen only to the deduct? Well, we could do that while we talk.
All right.
This is without my additional effects. Well, I mean, there's tons of additional effects on it, but this is what I was delivered. Lovely sound, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Alan, when you listen to something, the first time you get it, do you just do a single pass through and kind of just take it all in? Or, like, I know you mentioned writing down the Steely Dan notes in terms of
No, I
what
don't.
instrumentation's
I
there.
listen.
I'm curious
listen-
how emotional versus analytical you are at first listen.
I listen to the mock-up the whole way down. I
Mm.
listen to the mix that I've been sent the whole way down, top to bottom. I don't really think about it. I'm not really looking for I'm just trying to start living in the mix a little bit, getting inside the music. And then I'll do a pass where I'll go back and forth and see what I can expand or not expand. And if it's a type of scene where it really does need to coexist with dialogue or sound effects, I'll actually listen to the mix with the dialogue and the sound effects, and I'll mix it with the dialogue and the sound effects. I mean, I'll solo stuff, of course, but it's not really that much about soloing. I mean, of course, you want a solo to set your delays and stuff, and look for bad frequencies. Look for. Let's see so this was like a dynamic EQ to control the sort of root frequencies that were getting a little bit too wonky. And then
Nice.
just me taking it down to, I don't know why I did this actually. And then just a gentle compression, just to control the top levels, just to make everything a little bit louder, but and then just a little harshness that bothered me about it. Like with the duduk, I don't really feel like you really want to hear the breath. It's not like certain wood flutes and stuff. Duduk, I just really want to hear that gorgeous syrupy kind of sound. And to that, I added a little bit of this tape vary speed, just because I was
Oh,
trying to get some more modulation in there. And then this guy, which is short delays in this case. So if I turn this off, a different sort of ride. But this isn't about the delays. This is actually more about, to be honest with you, um, this marble bathroom, which I love, and some pitch change. Wow, dudes, you guys got some good questions. Um, I recorded over sampled Scottish bagpipes. Hans had and Pepper's guitars in the top. Yes, he did.
Alan, I have one from the Q&A actually. The question is, do you mix to picture or did you do a first mix with just the music? And I want to add on to that. This is the love theme which appears, at the various places in the movie. Do you think emotionally you would have done a slightly different mix to match the picture of the same melodic music, or how
This
do
is
you?
this was one of the last cues to come in because
Ah,
the Hans really, sort of like got knee deep. He got very deep into wanting this right. So, uh, in this case of Dune, everything was to picture. It's I don't mix anything without. I mean, I want to be inspired by this beautiful movie. It's not always the case with
right.
movies. A lot of things like Thin Red Line, we mixed a ton of stuff before we ever saw our first frame of picture. And the same thing with a lot of the Chris Nolan movies. Chris Nolan likes when I do a pass without actually seeing the picture.
Hmm.
He likes to see what's
Ah,
going to happen, and because he likes to tell me no a lot. But it's look, I've done over 300 movies. There isn't a question you can
wow.
ask me where I won't say yes and no and have data to back it up.
That's amazing. Um, what other questions do we have?
Well, I like all of
Uh,
this so emotionally arousing. My face is flushed just from listening. Is that Ken or Helen?
and Helen.
Ken. I love it. How do I organize subgroups? Let's take a look at a big part of this world, which is my VCA layer. It's if you look, basically, this is sort of the macro layer. Everything orchestral, everything. Uh, Everything orchestral, everything percussion, everything synth, everything vocal, everything else. And then we have all of my additional layer, and then the tune, and then I go micro. So I have all of whatever passes I have in there separated onto different VCAs and all that. Everything going. This is a big thing. So there's a lot of things there. And then all this live stuff is the stuff that was recorded after the sequencing was done that I got added at the end. And then, so that's how I control everything. And then everything goes to its own aux track. So in here, and I print everything at the same time. So this is my mastering page, pretty much. You see, this is super wide. Super wide. This score is way wider than any other score will be. And the reason is that the dubbing mixer and I, who have known each other for 30 years and are very, very good friends, he is one of the most phenomenal Atmos mixers there is, and I wanted to give him the absolute ability to create the Atmos for the. So you guys should know this: the Atmos for the film and the Atmos for the soundtrack are two different mixes. I did the one for the soundtrack, and the one in the film was all of my stuff in immersive in 7.1, but then Ron Bartlett created the Atmos, sort of deciding where things are going to go and stuff, and he did a brilliant job. So, but this is my mastering stage. So everything, when I'm done with the mix, I'll hit commit, and all these print the stems, and then those go off to the dudes.
That's awesome.
Oh, the resonating speakers in the session. I wouldn't be able to dig that up for you now, unfortunately. They're in there, but there's so many tracks in here, I wouldn't even know where to stop. But what that question is there was um, a, a, a group of guys, a couple of guys that came in with these resonators. It's like one of them is an amplifier, a speaker going into a cymbal. One of them is a speaker going into sort of a different kind of box. And there were 3 or 4 of them. We set them up in a room and created sends and sent stuff out there just to create resonances.
Mm.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Cool.
yeah. What else?
Let me ask you another thing, Alan. What's that one crazy thing that you thought might never work, but worked? When you were mixing, when you had that moment of, oh my God, let me try this, and one of those crazy things that no one might have imagined, maybe.
I'm sure it has something to do with massive amount of distortion playing back at very, very quiet levels. That's when I'll duplicate the track, make just a mess out of it, and then I'll commit it, and then I'll make a mess out of it again, and then I'll commit it, and then I'll make a mess out of it again, and then I'll just mix in enough just to kind of hear it buzz through, and then once I get to that level, I back it down a little bit and let it live there. And those tend to be quite successful. People like those. So I do that quite a bit.
Nice.
Um, um, I found, I can go back in history, not on this score, but one of the things I started doing a long time ago on this score, the Prestige. No, it was even before the Prestige. Well, it was on. Uh, well, let's say the Prestige, because I'm having um, a mental block about the name of the first score I did it on. And I took the score elements to Capitol Studios and I pumped everything back in the room individually, mic'd it up and recorded it back in and had that as my reverb as opposed to using reverb. And now, I mean, a lot of people do that now, and uh, I just love that sound. I love getting drier and drier and still having space. Because if I can stop having to use long space on a lot of stuff that crosses chords and stuff like that, I can get a lot of, I mean, this is a bad example of that, but for like orchestral music, it's if I can get that clarity. Traffic, that was the first move of it. That's why I'm talking and I'm spinning around, because I'm thinking of that. Traffic was the first score I did that on, because it was a synth score and they wanted it to sound more organic. So that's something that didn't look like it was going to work and ended up working and still works. Whenever I go to Abbey Road, when we finish recording, I pump everything on the pre-records out into the room and just have it. Why not? Why wouldn't I?
That's awesome. We have more and more questions coming in. Alan, if you feel like tackling any, feel free, please.
Go ahead. You want to
Mostly
ask them, or
compliments.
okay? Well,
Yeah,
here's
yeah.
here from Sam Downey, Bristol, England. Alan, great use of sound particle plugins. What's your workflow when using the plugins, and what others do you use? Yeah, I use a lot of different stuff. I use iMix and Logic. I'm autistic too. Greetings from the UK, and me at Abbey Road and the OMG Atmos Mix Engineer. Aw, hey Sam. I use a ton of all of them. There's not there isn't like one group. I mean, I use a ton of the sound particles. I use every Apogee. I love the modern compressor on the Apogee for just a tiny bit of, like, almost like the SSL compressor, just a tiny bit of control at the top, and so I can get just maybe another dB of level out of things without really doing any. Very slow attack, medium decay, and it just kind of sits there and holds fort at the top. It's not a limiter. But it's just a compressor to do that. Sometimes I use the fab filter for that. I use the fab filter a lot. I'm a weird bird. I use oh God, no one's gonna want to listen to me or ever hear from me again when they hear what I'm about to tell them. Um, but one of my favorite things to put on bass is spring reverb. So, for example,
Love it.
uh, just adds life to it to me. I know you can't hear it a lot, but that's the whole idea. So I use that a lot. What is that was, I think that's the same sound without it. That's with just, oh, I use it on there too. Look at me. Um, so I do, I'll find, Arturia makes great plugins. Plugin Alliance makes great plugins. UA makes great plugins. Waves makes awesome plugins. I'll use them all, but I like using a lot of the smaller companies too because I like to support them. Safari plugins is a new one I've been using a lot. I like those a lot. It's a tiny little company that just makes great stuff. You know, um, but Sound Particles, when I first met Nuno, before even Tony was at the company, and it was really about the density plugin. And I found that I could put that on Choir and create, 200 voices out of 20. And it was like a game changer for me, so I do that a lot. So it's hard for me to say what plugins I do. I try, it's like I almost don't care in a sense. I'll make it, sometimes I challenge myself and like I won't go to my normal plugins just to see if my ear can make it sound the way I want it to sound even without it. And when I teach my classes, I tell people, you know, let's change the rules a little bit. You only have 3 plugins. You have pick one reverb, pick one EQ, pick one compressor. Okay, 4, pick one saturation. And you can use as many of those as you want, but you can't use any other. Do a mix. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, it's good practice. Wow,
It is great practice.
these things are moving.
Alan, I
Yeah.
want to ask you something. Again, having seen you work, I'm curious how you evolved over the years, and you always constantly relearn and change and reinvent. How much do you mix when you're miking the orchestra, for example,
All of
versus
it.
you think, oh, I'll just throw some mics and it's in the
All of it.
mix.
All of it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've just used my stage mix as my final mix. The only reason I don't
Wow.
do that anymore is because now I've been doing this immersive array where there's a lot of mics involved, and I am recording in 714, and I can't really, it ties up too much resources on the scoring stage for me to do that. So I'm only monitoring 5.1, but I that balance is the most important balance I have. And in my head, I'm mixing from, even before that, when I listen to the pre-records that I'm going to play the orchestra, I'm already mixing, like I hear this big low end thing that I know is going to get doubled by the bass, and I start thinking about, well, if the live basses are on the right, maybe I want to gravitate that towards the left, or maybe I'd want to do the exact opposite and keep them exactly where they are with the orchestra to see what, and on and on and on and on.
That's amazing. Thanks, Alan. Just scrolling through comments and questions.
Let's see, let's go back. How many delays, reverbs, duplicate track plugins could you end up with using to generate the hugeness? Well, the way I work is every single stem I'm working with, or every single track I'm working with, like these are all my delivery tracks. There is a reverb, a basic reverb that is assigned to that already. There's a basic delay that's assigned to it already. And there's a feed to the subwoofer that's assigned to it already. So I have all those on sends and I can use those immediately. And it's usually, this is just a general reverb. Like you'll see a few different ones on here, but there's that. And I use this reverb, this is like, good luck finding it because it's sort of not sold anymore. I love this reverb. I fucking love this reverb. Um, uh, and I use the cinematic rooms a ton and, on what, the And then if I want something special or specific, I'll put it as an insert on the track. And then that means that that whole pile of sound gets sent to the reverb if I choose to use reverb. I don't think I'm using a lot of reverb in this mix. So if I hit play on this, you're probably not going to see a lot of stuff playing. Reverb, reverb return. That's all I'm doing. And everything else is just delays and balances and tuning and toning and depth and all that. I'm not using reverbs to create depth, or not using reverbs to create stereo width. I'm creating stereo width and then sending it to the reverb. It didn't make sense. I have to think about the right way to say that.
Which reminded me, you used to have layered reverbs, as far as I remember, using the brightcasties, like one on the front,
Right. I
stereo
still do that.
brightcasts in
This
the
is
back.
not, yeah, I still do that. This is not the score for it because there's no live orchestra.
Sure.
I still use, I'll have three bricasties, I'll have left, right, front, and rear, and I'll have two or
Right.
three passes. I have 10 bricasties, although I'm selling a bunch of them because it's that time in my life. And that's how I create my reverb. But I also do layer two reverb. So a lot of times you'll find I'm using two different halls at the same time to get sort of the sums and the differences in those. And it creates an interesting modulation characteristic. It creates an interesting decay characteristic. So I might use some 480s, or I might use the cinematic rooms, or I might use the 3D reverb, or I could use one of the, the new black hole immersive, and then combine them together, even though they're the same length, to create sort of a third unique sound out of them.
That's brilliant, because pretty much you are sculpting a sonic world and then putting music in it. That's beautiful.
Well, on this one I am.
Alan,
yeah.
I mean, you're awesome. I'm just looking at questions and compliments, and it's beautiful to read all this.
How come I'm not seeing the compliments?
I
want to see the compliments.
Hey, Alan, I have another question for you.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So I saw earlier on, there's ways you use modulation to create texture. And I know that there was like phases on one of the tracks. I was curious, where do you reach for different modulation tools? Like, for example, where would something like Clear Mountain's phases fit? And when would you choose for a different type of modulation to create texture?
Clear Mountain's phase has become probably one of my favorite ones to use. And the way I use it, believe it or not, more and more is by doing if I'm on a stereo track, I put it on as a dual mono. And that way I can bypass one side and just put the phase on the other side, because it's a very cool way to get movement. And, or I'll play with the settings where one will have the flanger, one will have the phaser, or something like that. In terms of like more stereoized, generalized modulation, everything sort of comes back to my roots. So I use the Dimension D plugins a lot on bass and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of great phasers and flangers out there, and I'll experiment with all of them, but I won't lie, and I will say that since the Clear Mountain phasers came out, I borrowed those phasers, the actual original ones in like 1977 or 78 that Nile Rodgers had, the exact same boxes. So I had experience actually using them. So a lot of that comes, there's an emotional connection that happens with, that's the interesting thing nowadays with software, is people have emotional connections to freaking software,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of you guys and women out there have never actually used an 1176, but you use 1176s in here and you love the sound, and that makes total sense. But for me, that connection is because of how I remember an 1176 or an 1178, LA2A, LA3A, all that stuff working. Yeah. Okay, what else? Come on.
Another question from Shane. Does Alan ever use headphones to check immersive mixes?
Is that my Shane?
Shane Mendonça.
Do I check headphones to check mixes? Yes. Immersive mixes? Yes. I will listen to the binaural feed of an Atmos mix to see, it's very easy for something to collapse, and I look for that, and that's a hard thing to tell on speakers. You got to sort of hear the binaural crash down, and then a lot of the, most of the time I'm making sure that the two mix I do is good. There are times where I have found recently that I'll start my mix in Atmos and then go to the stereo because of all the processing I do to create the depth and field of depth. It adds up to something very pleasant in the stereo that then needs to be sort of controlled, but I like that. I use two sets of headphones, Ludwig. I use 650, well, three sets actually, 650s, Sennheiser 650s. I use the Audezes, and then believe it or not, I very much like the Sony and the Bose noise canceling headphones, only because I spend a lot of time in them in the gym, so I sort of know them. So if I hear it on there and the low end sounds good, I know I'm in pretty good shape.
Right. And since you mentioned two-track mixes, are you still doing separate two-track mixes parallelly, or are you mostly now, like you already mentioned, going from Atmos and using the stereo down mix from the renderer?
Usually I do both. It's very easy to do both. So I'll always have a stereo pathway set up in the session so that I can have a
Okay,
direct stereo feed that's following everything. It's coming off of those
sure.
auxes. And then if I'm doing an Atmos mix, I will compare that to the two mix direct that they have and to the binaural. But if I
Okay,
walk away
perfect.
with a good stereo mix on that and a good binaural mix out of the renderer, I'm a happy camper.
That's awesome. Looks like we are hitting the top of the hour. I just want to thank you, Alan, so much on behalf of Sound Particles and Apogee and everyone in attendance. And once again, a happy birthday to you, my friend and
Thank
mentor.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And everyone, just keep making music. Here's the beauty of where we are now is it's a great equal playing field. It doesn't matter if I have 2,000 plugins and you have 200 plugins. You can still, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. So just keep listening and follow your dream, follow your love. And if there's someone whose work you appreciate, reach out to them. There's most of the people in this business are pretty nice people. I come to Mix with the Masters. I'd love to see you there. We're going to do it every year until they stop me. We just did one in February with 20 people. It was just fantastic. And it's, great having this forum. Yeah, great stuff. Really appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, feel free to reach out to all of us, at Apogee, at Sound Particles, support at soundparticles.com or tony.joy@soundparticles.com. We would love to hear from you. Questions, comments, thoughts, always welcome. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Alan, George, thank you so much once more. Bye, everyone.